Hey, welcome back to Freshman World History. Hey, everybody. So today we're going to talk more about China, and specifically Chapter 7, Section 3 of our textbook, the Han Dynasty, shortly after the fall of the Qin Dynasty. We remember that was Shi Huangdi and then a little bit of his son in power, and that's it, just like one ruler and a quarter. Maybe. So after the Qin Dynasty, which gave China its name, a general named Liu Bang, B-A-N-G, started a brand new dynasty in China called the Han Dynasty, H-A-N. Just like Shi Huangdi, Liu Bang established a centralized government in China. Big decisions were not made locally, they were made by the emperor in the capital city. He established a centralized government, just like Shi Huangdi did with strengthening the trunk and weakening the branches. Big decisions were not made locally. They were made instead by the emperor in the capital city. He lowered taxes to become popular, and he backed off on a lot of the harsh rules that Shi Huangdi used to have. And Liu Bang was able to back off on some of those rules because they had already been put in place and people were already used to having a single currency and a single system of weights and measurements, so he could chill out a bit and not have to be the bad guy. When Liu Bang died, his wife, Empress Lu, L-U, ran the country by controlling which one of her kids would be named the next emperor. She made sure to switch to the next youngest. Whenever the one who was supposedly ready to become the next emperor was ready, she wouldn't allow it to happen, and she'd say, no, it's going to be this younger son of mine. And so she kept control for years and years by switching off which of her children was going to be the next emperor. Eventually, a gifted grandchild or great-grandchild of Liu Bang named Wu Di, W-U-D-I, Wu Di, became the emperor, and he was the longest ruling emperor of the Han Dynasty. He ended the policy that the Chinese had of bribing these savages in the north who were threatening to come down and invade China, called the Xiongnu. X-I-O-N-G-N-U, the Xiongnu. And so he stopped bribing these guys to not come anymore and instead put together a group of other people who also hated the Xiongnu. And when the Xiongnu didn't get their bribe money and they decided to attack as revenge, they were defeated. So the emperor didn't have to worry about the Xiongnu anymore. Han rulers spent a lot of time having canals and irrigation ditches made to improve trade in China so the people could be wealthier. They used exams, just like previous rulers had used Confucian exams, the ideas of Confucius, to make sure that they would get a strong civil service, a strong government employee corps. The Han period was really, really important for inventions. They invented paper for record keeping. For farming, they invented harnesses on horses and plows. They invented iron tools for farming, and they invented the wheelbarrow. So really big changes in farming under the Han Dynasty, really huge advances in technology. They also invented water mills so that you get a big wheel that turns from the power of the river, and this grinds machinery so that you can make flour out of grain and make bread more efficiently instead of having to pulverize the grain by hand. You can just use the wheels of the water mill, the gears. Now, the government thought that farming and making food was a more noble job for people to do, more useful in society than by selling stuff as a merchant And this is really interesting because our society has like the opposite opinion. We look down on farmers and look up to businessmen who own their own businesses where they don't actually make the stuff that they're selling. They just buy it from somebody else for cheap and sell it to you for more. Merchants. So in Chinese culture, farmers were higher as a social class than merchants were. Regardless of how rich a merchant got, they still wouldn't be as high a social class as a farmer. The government had complete control over making and selling certain products like salt and iron and coins. And this is called a monopoly, like the board game Monopoly, when you have all of the blues or all of the reds or all of the yellows or greens, then you have a monopoly and you can charge more. Well, the Chinese felt that having a monopoly, a government monopoly on certain things was really important. They also had a monopoly on the making of silk. Silk is hugely important in Chinese history. It makes them a super rich and powerful country because it's an incredibly desirable product. Silk can be armor in some cases, like if you shoot an arrow at silk, if the silk is woven well, the arrowhead may not even go through the silk. So it's like armor. But at the same time, it's incredibly soft and breathable. It's just an incredible cloth, very expensive, highly sought after, and rare. The Chinese government kept it a secret how to make silk. And if you knew how to make silk and you tried to escape from China, you would be executed as a traitor for bringing the secret of making silk to some other country. The rest of the world loved silk, and so the Chinese kept it as much of a secret as they could so they could have a monopoly on it. The Han Dynasty took over a lot of territory outside of China, and they came up with a clever way of making people in those territories loyal to China, even though they weren't Chinese. And they decided that they would make them culturally more Chinese. This is an event or a process called assimilation. So they would assimilate people into Chinese culture. If they conquered a territory, then they'd get Chinese people to move there and marry local people and teach the local spouses that they just married how to be Chinese and teach the children to be Chinese, so that within a couple of generations, the local culture is lost and everybody is just Chinese. So this is the assimilation that the Chinese did in territories that they conquered. Children would be educated in schools that only taught Chinese. All government documents were only in Chinese. So really the Chinese dominated when they took over a place. During the Han Dynasty, there were scholars like Sima Xian, Simaxian, who started to write Chinese history. This is their first historian, really, Sima Xian. And there was also a family that decided to become authors and write. The dad was Ban Biao, Biao. And see, in China, culturally, they're different than Americans and Brits and French and Italians and Spanish because the family name comes first. So whereas I am Jason of the Curry family, in China, Ban is the first name, but it's the family name. So it's an indication, like in Western cultures, your first name is your identity, and your second name is just what group you fit in with. Because in our cultures, we're taught that our identity is more important, that we are individuals who can make our own choices. Whereas in Chinese culture, they're what we call collectivist instead of individualist. And what's more important is the family group that you belong to. That's how you get power. It's who you support, and it's how you make your way in the world. So in Chinese culture, the family name comes first. So Ban Biao and his children, Ban Gu, Gu, and Ban Zhao, Zhao. They kept a long-running history project of Chinese history going for decades. Life for women in Han China was a lot like life for women in the Roman period and the early medieval period. They were expected to take care of the family, help out on the farm or whatever the family's job is. Some women in Chinese history in the Han Dynasty became nuns. Others, if they were wealthy, got an education. So it's a lot like medieval Europe. The Han Dynasty didn't last forever. The population had boomed, but the problem was that sons inherited smaller and smaller plots of land from their dads. See, in some countries in Europe at this time, the oldest son gets everything. Like if a dad has 5 sons, the oldest son is going to inherit all of the land and all of the titles. The other sons have to make their own way in the world. They have to go into the army, or they have to go into the church, or they have to go into the government and make their own way. They don't inherit an equal share of their dad's stuff. But in China, they didn't practice that policy. That policy is called primogeniture. Geniture like genetics, like passing it down through the DNA. And primo means one. So you pass it to the one oldest kid, to the one oldest son. In China, they didn't do that. They split their lands. And so if you have 7 sons, then your family land is divided into 7 parts when you die, and each son gets an equal part. After 100 years of that, or 200 years of that, there's not really enough land to even farm in the hands of every single adult male. So it was really tough. Just like in ancient Rome, rich farmers were able to buy out the smaller farmers and kick them off the land, which left them angry and made them go to cities and be angry in cities and lead rebellions against the government. The rich didn't have to pay taxes in China. Only the middle class and the poor had to pay taxes. See, if the kings, if the emperors of China taxed the nobles, then the nobles would get a say in the government. And the emperors didn't want the nobles to have a say. So the deal is, don't tax me, and I won't get to complain. I won't get to vote on things. And so the nobles didn't have to pay taxes in exchange for not being entitled to help make decisions. When the government needed more money, it didn't tax the nobles and the rich, it taxed the poor and the middle class. Things got bad for a while. Rebellions during Han China flared up, and the emperors failed to fix all the problems. Eventually, one of the very best advisors of a Han ruler, named Wang Mang, overthrew the Han dynasty and took over as the emperor. He restored order for a short period of time by increasing the amount of money available to the people, causing a little bit of inflation, but not bad enough to make people angry. He helped feed the poor by redistributing farmland so that people could have enough to make a living. However, there was a problem. There was a giant flood, and it devastated large parts of China. Rich and poor alike took this flood to be a sign that the gods didn't approve of Wang Mang. And so they overthrew him and they killed him. So Wang Mang's dynasty was just him. China rebounded pretty well. The Han dynasty took control again, and this is what we call the later Han dynasty. The later Han dynasty, though, didn't last forever. Within about 200 years, it was gone, and China had broken up into 3 different kingdoms. More next time.